Hello, all, and a warm welcome to a special breaking exclusive installment of the Lowdown. It's noon on May 11th. Over the past few days, our headlines have been dominated by the unfolding situation in Israel. To help us understand the details of what's happening, we are joined today by Lahav Harkov, who serves as the senior contributing editor and diplomatic correspondent for the Jerusalem Post. Lahav joins us from Israel. Thanks for being with us today, Lahav.
Sure. Thanks for inviting me on.
Firstly, can you give us a status update? There have been reports of a potential ceasefire mediated by Egypt taking hold. Where do we stand currently?
So at this point, Israel is wants what it always wants at the end of these things, which is an unconditional ceasefire, or as Netanyahu says it, quiet will be answered by quiet. Like, you stop shooting, we stop shooting. Whereas Islamic Jihad is making all sorts of other demands. That Israel commit to not assassinating the terrorists anymore, or that Israel return the body of the Palestinian terrorist who went on hunger strike and died last week or 2 weeks ago. I don't remember anymore. And Israel saying no. Like, well, you want a ceasefire? Great, let's hold fire. So that's about where it stands. As of this morning, Egypt is still bringing messages back and forth between the sides. And Palestinian Islamic Jihad is trying to make additional demands. They're trying to sort of turn the ceasefire into an opportunity. And Israel's like, this is not your this is not your opportunity. You didn't win here.
And what led up to this recent escalation in violence?
Well, it's been more than a year at this point, I think, where we have terrorist attacks, constant terrorist attacks, almost every day. Most of them not successful, thank God, but we've had, you hear about the ones where people are severely injured or people are killed, and they've been happening quite frequently. And it's since last Ramadan, roughly. So this is sort of within that framework, unfortunately. And last week, Islamic Jihad shot 102 rockets into Israel in one day. And Israel didn't respond that day, which was a sort of domestic political issue. And people were angry about that in Israel. But about a week later, Israel then bombed the homes of 3 different Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorists. It was a pinpoint operation where you could see pictures of these apartment buildings where there's one apartment that's bombed out and the rest of the building is fine. And that's sort of how this new round started with Islamic Jihad last week, but Israel took, its time and gathered its intelligence and waited for the right time to respond.
And there has seemed to be a greater concern of escalation in Israel and among Israeli officials than in previous exchanges with Gaza. Would you agree? And can you tell us why is that?
Well, I think there's always a concern about escalation. Ideally, these things would be contained, right? I guess there's 2 ways of looking at it. The way the establishment in Israel looks at it is that ideally they want to contain these events, make them as short as possible, even though when you start a war, you never know how it's going to end, right? So you have to prepare for all possibilities. There are other ways of looking at it, right? Because maybe this happens every summer roughly. And maybe there's some way to stop it once and for all so that it doesn't happen every summer. I don't have the answers to that. So, whether this idea of trying to contain it into brief rounds of fighting or whether there's something else we could do to make it end is I think the big open question about Israel and Gaza. But in any case, I think what you're referring to is the fact that Israel's trying not to get Hamas involved. And it's not unprecedented, but it is not the way Israel did things, for most of the years since Hamas took over Gaza in 2006. Most of the time, Israel said Hamas is responsible for whatever happens in Gaza. I think that part of the reasoning is that Hamas is really on the sidelines right now. They're not the ones who shot the rockets last week. They haven't been shooting rockets, since then. And so, if Israel can just respond to Palestinian Islamic Jihad, stop them and get quiet back, like, now is not the time to get Hamas involved and have like a big war.
So you think that the element of Hamas here is completely eliminated in this situation? Because we have seen that Israel has also sought to downplay Hamas's involvement in this recent escalation. So really What role has Hamas been playing in the recent spate of rocket attacks?
Well, there's sort of like it's not playing the micro role in the sense that Hamas terrorists are not the ones shooting the rockets right now. It plays a macro role in that Hamas runs Gaza and allows Palestinian Islamic Jihad to commit acts of terrorism against Israel on its watch, right? So one can choose how to look at it, right? And the defense establishment in Israel has made a different choice than it has in the past and has decided to look at it as we're fighting Islamic Jihad right now.
And lastly, turning to the Israeli political landscape, what effect would you say Operation Shield and Arrow has had on the Israeli political outlook?
So I think it'll take a little time to know for sure. On the level of this coalition functioning internally, there was internal fighting between the parties of the coalition, which was in part because the far right parties of the coalition felt that Netanyahu was not responding strongly enough to the rockets last week. So that seems to have been resolved, right? As far as the larger political questions, whether it's about judicial reform, whether it's about if Netanyahu can sort of move the sort of puzzle pieces around and have a coalition that's less extreme, I don't think anything's going to change. And, if you look at the example of 2021, right, there was operation in Gaza, and that was also the time that tragically there was fighting, that Arabs were attacking Jews inside Israel, and then some Jews in Israel fought back. Also, it was it was a pretty terrible time, only 11 days long, but a terrible 11 days, and yet the following week, we had a new government formed. Naftali Bennett was prime minister, and they had this, sort of unity government. And if somebody can make a political move like that was unprecedented and drastic, I just don't think that people are going to change the way they see politics all of a sudden because of this. But, if this is somehow seen as a runaway success for Netanyahu, maybe it'll help him in the polls.
Well, thank you so much, Lahav, for being here and giving us a quick brief on the unfolding situation in Israel. We really appreciate it.
Sure.